I got home from 3 days on the road, and the space in the driveway where my car should have been was just an oil stain and my mother-in-law's smile. She stood on the porch with her hands folded like she'd been waiting for the show to start. She told me the family had voted. She said it the way you'd announce a birthday. What she didn't know was that she had just voted to steal something that had never belonged to a single person in that house, and the next 5 hours would teach her exactly what that word meant. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we sit with the women who stayed quiet for years and finally decided the quiet wasn't worth it. If a family ever told you your success belonged to all of them, this one's for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Thea Traver, and I was 34 years old, standing in my mother-in-law's driveway with a rolling suitcase and a headache from a delayed flight out of Denver. I had spent 3 days in hotel conference rooms selling surgical equipment to hospital buyers who negotiate for a living. I was good at staying calm under pressure. That was the thing everyone said about me. Chloe came down the porch steps in her good cardigan, the one she wore for church and for occasions, and I understood that to her, this was an occasion. She reached out and squeezed my arm like she was consoling me. "The family voted, dear," she said. "It's Sarah's car now." I looked at the empty rectangle of concrete where I'd parked the Mercedes on Thursday morning. There was a dark smear of oil and a scatter of dead leaves and nothing else. My first instinct was the one I'd trained into myself over 6 years of marriage, which was to smile and ask a gentle question and let the moment pass without anyone raising their voice. So I did the first part. I kept my face still. "Which family?" I asked. Chloe blinked, like the question didn't compute. Like the answer was so obvious it barely needed saying. "Ours," she said. "We sat down Sunday and we talked it through, and everyone agreed. Sarah needs it more than you do." Behind her, the front door of the house opened, and I waited to see whether the one person who was supposed to be on my side would come out and stand next to me. I waited to see whether my husband would say a single word. Marcus came out onto the porch with his hands in his pockets. He is 36. And I have loved his easy smile since our first date. And in that moment his easy smile was nowhere on his face. He looked at me, and then he looked at the concrete, and then he looked at a spot somewhere between us that required no eye contact with anyone. He said nothing. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind him, 31 and glowing, spinning a key ring around her finger. My key ring. The little enamel tag I'd bought at an airport gift shop was still clipped to it. "You're gone all the time anyway," she said, walking down to join her mother like they'd rehearsed the blocking. "You barely even use it. It just sits here." Her daughter Ivy, who is 6 and has her mother's exact chin, peeked out from behind Sarah's leg and stared at me with the frank curiosity children have before anyone teaches them to look away. I stood there in a driveway full of people who shared my last name, and I have never felt more alone in my life. I did the math on how many of them were on my side. The answer was a number smaller than 1. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice level, "that car has a company logo on the registration." She waved a hand like I'd mentioned the weather. Marcus always said it was basically a gift, a perk they threw in, and perks are for the family. I turned to look at my husband. He was studying his own shoes like they held instructions. The silence coming off that porch was the loudest thing in the whole quiet neighborhood, and it was coming from the man I'd married. You have to understand who I had trained myself to be. 6 years earlier, I had married into this family with the belief that if I gave enough, they would eventually make room for me. When Chloe wanted the holidays at her house, I brought the good dishes and did the cleanup. When Sarah needed money for a deposit, I wired it and never mentioned it again. When Marcus's father was dying, I took the unpaid leave, not Marcus, because I was the one who could hold it together. I told myself this was maturity. I told myself that keeping the peace was a kind of strength, that a bigger person absorbs the small slights and lets them go. Every Thanksgiving, Chloe would preside over the table and say the same thing, the sentence she treated as a family creed, warm as gravy and hard as a fist underneath. In this family, what one has, the family has. Everyone would nod. I nodded too. For 6 years, because nodding was easier than the fight, and I told myself the fight would cost more than the swallowing. What I never understood until that driveway was that they had been counting my nods. Every time I let something go, they filed it away as proof that I would let the next thing go too. I thought I was buying goodwill. I was only teaching them the price of my silence, which turned out to be nothing at all. The car in the driveway wasn't the first thing they'd taken. It was just the first thing that came with a lien holder, a GPS unit, and my signature on a document that made it my problem in a way none of them could possibly imagine yet. I picked up my suitcase and I went inside, because the old instinct was still driving. Let it go tonight. Sort it out tomorrow when everyone's calmer. That was the voice I'd listened to for 6 years, and it was very persuasive, because it always promised that peace was just one more swallow away. I sat down at Chloe's kitchen table, the same table where the family creed got recited every holiday, and I let myself imagine the easy version of the evening. I would say the car was a misunderstanding. Marcus would eventually get it back with a phone call. Sarah would pout for a week and then forget. Nobody would have to raise their voice, and I would go home having kept the fragile thing I'd spent 6 years protecting. I had my hand on that plan. I could feel the shape of it, the relief of not fighting. Chloe was already at the stove, humming, moving around her kitchen like a woman who had solved a problem rather than created one. Then my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. It was a work email, and the subject line was routine, the kind of thing I'd normally skim and archive. I opened it out of habit, the way you check a text at a red light. I read the first 2 lines, then I read them again. And the easy version of the evening, the one where I stayed quiet and everything smoothed over by morning, quietly died in my hands, because that email had just made staying quiet the single most dangerous thing I could possibly do. The email was from Dana Okafor in Fleet Compliance, and it was addressed to every employee assigned a company vehicle. Reminder, it read, quarterly fleet audit this coming Monday at 9 a.m. All assigned vehicles must be physically verified at their registered addresses. Any vehicle not accounted for will be flagged as misappropriated pending investigation. I read the word misappropriated 3 times. The Mercedes in my driveway had never been a gift. It had never been a perk to hand around a dinner table like a dish of green beans. It was a fleet vehicle, titled to the company, assigned to me 3 years ago when I made senior rep and traded up from the older company sedan I'd driven before that. I drove 40,000 miles a year to hospitals in it, and I had signed a custody agreement to get the keys. I was the name on that agreement. Not Marcus. Not the family. Me. If that car was not sitting at its registered address on Monday morning, it would be my name attached to the word misappropriated, and I sell to hospital compliance officers for a living, so I know exactly what that word does to a career. I must have gone very still, because Chloe glanced over from the stove and read my expression completely wrong. See? She said gently, misreading the blood leaving my face as surrender. I knew you'd come around once you had a minute to think about it. She smiled at me, warm and certain. A woman who believed she had just watched me accept the family's decision. I looked back down at the phone. She had no idea that the ground under this whole house had just shifted, and that the only person in the room who could feel it move was me. I tried the gentle way first, because I always tried the gentle way first. I caught Marcus by the sleeve and steered him into the kitchen pantry, out of Chloe's line of sight, and I kept my voice down to something only he could hear. Marcus, that car belongs to my company, I said. It is not ours. It is not Sarah's. If it's not back at our house by Monday, I'm the one who answers for it. I watched his face for the moment it would land, for him to understand and step up. It didn't come. He glanced toward the doorway where his mother was, and his jaw did the thing it does when he wants a problem to disappear without him having to touch it. Can we not do this tonight? He said. Mom's happy. Sarah's happy. It's one car, Thea. Let me handle it, okay? I'll smooth it over. Handle it. He'd been saying that for 6 years, and I had never once seen him handle anything that required disappointing his mother. Then he said the thing he always said, The sentence that had ended 100 conversations before they could become arguments, low and pleading, like he was asking me for a favor instead of my silence. Just keep the peace, Thea. For me. And there it was, the trade I'd been making for 6 years, laid out in that soft, worn-out plea. My peace for his comfort. My name for his mother's good mood. I looked at him, and I understood, maybe for the first time, that when Marcus asked me to keep the peace, he had never once meant that he would help me carry it. Dinner was a performance, and I was the only one who hadn't been given a script. Chloe served pot roast and told the story of the vote like it was a bedtime tale with a happy ending. We went around the room, she said, passing the potatoes, and everyone said their piece, and it was unanimous. That's how this family does things. Fair and square. She genuinely believed it. That was the part I kept snagging on. She wasn't gloating. To Chloe, taking my car and giving it to Sarah wasn't theft. It was governance. The natural exercise of a mother's right to move resources to wherever the need was greatest. For a moment her voice softened, and she said something almost to herself. My mother-in-law did the same for me once. Sat me down, told me how it would be. Nobody asked what I wanted back then either. It was the closest she came to a crack in the certainty, and it was gone as fast as it arrived. Then Ivy, 6 years old, holding her fork like a scepter, looked across the table at me and asked the only honest question anyone had asked all night. "Aunt Thea," she said, "is it your car?" The table went quiet. Sarah's fork stopped. Marcus found something fascinating in his plate. Chloe's smile held, but her eyes cut to me, waiting to see if I'd give the child the peaceful answer, the one that kept everyone comfortable. I looked at that little girl who still thought the truth was a thing you were allowed to say out loud at a dinner table, and I realized the road where I stayed quiet had just run out of pavement. I didn't sleep that night. I drove the 20 minutes back to our own house, the house Marcus and I actually lived in, and I sat at my desk in the dark with my laptop open, and I read the entire company vehicle policy from the first line to the last. I have read a lot of contracts. This is a skill you develop when your job is selling equipment to hospitals. What I read was worse than I'd let myself imagine at the dinner table. The custody agreement made me personally responsible for the physical location and condition of the vehicle. Unauthorized transfer of possession was listed in plain language as grounds for termination, and depending on the value involved, as a matter the company could refer to law enforcement. That car had a manufacturer's sticker price of $70,000. This was not a parking ticket. This was the difference between the career I had built one hospital account at a time and a phone call to human resources that ended with security walking me to the door. I sat there, and I understood the real shape of the box I was in. If I stayed quiet to keep the family peace, I lost my job. If I acted, I detonated the fragile thing I'd spent 6 years protecting. There was no version of Monday morning where I got to keep both. Somewhere in Chloe's house, 20 minutes away, my mother-in-law was sleeping the sound sleep of a woman who believed she had done something fair, and I was awake doing arithmetic on my own life, because the deadline was real, and the clock had already started. By Sunday morning, it had gone public, which meant the quiet exit I'd been hoping for was already gone. Sarah had posted a photo of the Mercedes to every account she had. "My new baby," she'd written, with a string of heart emojis, parked in Chloe's driveway with a bow someone had stuck to the windshield like it was Christmas morning. She'd tagged half her contacts and announced a little gathering that evening, drinks in the driveway, come see the new car. People were already commenting, "Congratulations, gorgeous, you deserve it." I scrolled through it at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold, and I felt the walls of the box move in another inch. You cannot quietly return a car that 30 people have already congratulated your sister-in-law for owning. Whatever I did now would have an audience, because Sarah had built one. Then a new comment loaded at the bottom, and my stomach dropped. It was from a woman named Priya, a district manager 2 rungs above me on the org chart, someone whose name I'd seen on quarterly reports. "Cute," she'd written under the photo of my sister-in-law's new baby. "Isn't that a company fleet car? The Halverson wrap is still on the plate frame." I stared at the little frame around the license plate in Sarah's photo. There it was, the branded holder the fleet department bolted onto every vehicle, clear as day in the background of Sarah's celebration. My worlds had just touched. The family that thought this car was a gift, and the company that knew exactly whose name was on the title were now looking at the same photograph, and the countdown to Monday just got a lot louder. I called the fleet compliance line on Sunday, which tells you how far past normal this had already gone. Dana Okafor answered on a weekend, and her voice was calm and procedural, the voice of someone who has heard every excuse a human being can invent for why a company car is not where it's supposed to be. I explained it plainly. A family member had taken the vehicle without my authorization. I intended to have it back at its registered address before the audit. Dana didn't get angry, and she didn't get sympathetic, which was somehow worse than both. "I'll be honest with you about where this stands," she said. "Every vehicle in the fleet has GPS. I'm looking at yours right now, and it is not at your registered address. It has not been at your registered address since Thursday afternoon." I closed my eyes. Of course it had a tracker. I had known that in some back room of my mind, and I had let the family fantasy paper over it. "The custody agreement you signed," Dana went on, "puts the responsibility on you. Not on whoever is currently sitting in the driver's seat, on you." She let that settle, and then she asked me the question that made my hands go cold against the phone. She asked it the way you'd ask someone which door they wanted to walk through, knowing both of them led somewhere they wouldn't like. I stood in my own kitchen, the Sunday light coming in, and I realized that the choice I'd spent 6 years avoiding was about to be handed to me by a stranger with a clipboard, and that this time there would be no gentle third option waiting to save me. "Do you want us to open a recovery order?" Dana asked, "or will the vehicle be returned voluntarily by Monday?" A recovery order. I knew what that was. That was the company sending its own contracted tow operator to physically repossess its property, with a police case number attached, no matter whose driveway it was sitting in. That was the nuclear option, and Dana was offering me the button. I asked her for 24 hours. I told her I believed I could get the car returned voluntarily, that I wanted to give my family the chance to do the right thing before I brought a tow truck into it. Even then, even with my job on the line, I was still reaching for the version where nobody had to be humiliated. Dana was quiet for a second. "I can hold the recovery order until Monday at 7 a.m., she said. "That's the latest I can give you and still verify the vehicle before the 9 o'clock audit. After 7, it's out of my hands and it's out of yours." 24 hours. I could have hung up and let the family sort it out at Thanksgiving like everything else. Let it become another story Chloe told her way. But some part of me already knew what the quiet had cost me, and it wasn't a car. If you've ever been outvoted by people who never had the right to vote, stay with me, because this is where it turns. And subscribe. I hung up with Dana and I sat with the number 7 in my head like a stone in my shoe, because I had one day to do 6 years of talking I had never let myself do. I drove back to Chloe's house that afternoon with an offer, because I am the kind of person who brings a solution even to people who created the problem. I found Sarah and Chloe in the kitchen and I laid it out reasonably. The Mercedes had to go back. No exceptions. But I understood Sarah needed a car. I told her I would help her buy a good, reliable used one, something a few years old with low miles, and I'd put real money toward it. I meant it. It was more than fair. Sarah laughed at me. Not a nervous laugh, a genuine one, like I'd offered her a coupon. "A used car?" she said, looking at her mother and then back at me. "You want to give me somebody else's used car when I already have a Mercedes sitting right outside." I kept my voice even. "It isn't your Mercedes, Sarah. That's the whole point." Chloe set down her dish towel and folded her hands, and she used the tone she saved for settling children. "Thea," she said, "we voted. The whole family sat down and we voted, and this is what was decided. I don't understand why you keep fighting something that's already done." That was when I finally saw it clearly. It was never about the car being fair or unfair to them. It was about the vote being sacred to them, a ritual that turned taking into giving, that let them feel generous while helping themselves to my life. You cannot reason a person out of a thing that makes them feel righteous. I had brought a solution to people who did not experience this as a problem, and I watched my last reasonable option die on that kitchen counter. Marcus followed me out to the porch when I left, and for once he actually said something, though I would have given a great deal to unhear it. "Look," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, not meeting my eyes. I might have, over the years, sort of let Mom think the car was more of a company gift than a work thing. It made it easier. She gets weird about money, about who has what. It was easier to let her think it was just a perk they threw in. I stood very still. "You told your mother my company car was a gift." He winced. "I didn't say gift exactly. I just didn't correct her when she assumed. There's a difference." There was not a difference, and we both knew it. But that wasn't even the part that took the floor out from under me. Because if he had told her it was a gift, then every time Chloe recited her creed at that table, "What one has the family has," she'd been mentally including a $70,000 asset she thought I'd been given as a bonus. He hadn't just failed to defend me. He had spent years quietly building the exact misunderstanding that made this theft feel legitimate to his mother. He'd handed her the story, and now she was living inside it. I looked at my husband on his mother's porch, and I understood that the vote hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been growing for 6 years, watered by a man who found the truth about his own wife too inconvenient to say out loud, and I hadn't even heard the worst of what he'd say yet. I drove home and I went straight to the file cabinet in the spare room, the one where I keep every important document because I am the person in this marriage who keeps important documents. I pulled the folder marked employment, and inside it was a manila envelope, and inside that was the custody agreement I'd signed the day they'd handed me the keys 3 years ago. I sat down on the floor with it, and I read it under the lamp, slowly, the way I should have made everyone read it at that dinner table. There was my signature, there was the vehicle identification number, and there, in the paragraph I'd skimmed past 3 years ago because who reads the whole thing, was the sentence that changed everything. Employee assumes personal liability for the company-titled vehicle. Unauthorized transfer of possession is strictly prohibited and constitutes grounds for termination and potential referral to law enforcement. I held that envelope in both hands, and something in me went quiet and clear. All weekend I'd been fighting to get back my car. But it had never been my car. That was the thing none of them understood, the thing that made the whole vote a kind of dark comedy. I held the piece of paper that proved the thing they'd voted to give away had never belonged to a single person in that room. Not to me, not to Sarah, not to Chloe, who had passed it around her table like a family heirloom. They had held a solemn vote to redistribute something none of them owned, and in doing it, they had put my name, my job, my whole self-made life on the line for a car that was only ever passing through my hands. And for the first time all weekend, I stopped feeling cornered, because you cannot be cornered by a lie once you're holding the truth in your own 2 hands. I made copies. I photocopied the custody agreement and the relevant page of the vehicle policy and Dana's audit email, and I put them in a clean folder, and I want to be clear about why, because it matters. I wasn't building a case to humiliate anyone. I wasn't assembling ammunition for a big scene. I was doing the thing I had refused to do for 6 years, which was to make the truth impossible to talk around. For most of my marriage, I had believed that saying the plain truth out loud was a kind of aggression, that if I just loved them enough and gave them enough, the facts would sort themselves out without me having to be the one who said them. That was the lie underneath all my quiet. The truth had always been on my side. I had just been too afraid to set it on the table where everyone could see it, because I thought protecting the family from the truth was the same as protecting the family. It isn't. Keeping a lie comfortable is not the same as keeping the peace. I'd been running interference for Marcus's story for years without even knowing I was doing it, softening things, letting assumptions stand, being the good sport. The folder in my hands was the moment I stopped. Not a weapon. A light. I was going to walk into that driveway and I was going to turn it on, and whatever the truth showed when it hit the family they'd all built in the dark, I was finally done being the one who kept the switch turned off. Sunday evening, the driveway party was in full swing when I got there. Chloe had put out a folding table with lemonade and a plate of cookies. Sarah had a little cluster of friends around the Mercedes, and the bow was still stuck to the windshield, and somebody had parked so the porch light hit the hood just right. Neighbors had drifted over. There were maybe 15 people in that driveway, holding plastic cups, admiring a car that belonged to a medical device company in a business park 40 miles away. I sat in my rental across the street for a full minute before I got out, watching my sister-in-law accept congratulations for owning something she didn't own, and I felt the old fear rise up. The one that said, don't make a scene, don't be the difficult one, don't be the reason the party ends. Then I thought about the word misappropriated with my name next to it, and I opened the car door. I walked up the driveway with the folder under my arm, and heads started to turn, the way they do when someone arrives who isn't smiling. Sarah saw me, and her face did something complicated. Chloe straightened up by the lemonade. Marcus, over by the porch, went still. Ivy was sitting on the front step with a cookie, watching everything with those frank 6-year-old eyes. 15 faces turned toward me in a driveway lit like a stage, and for the first time in my life, I did not shrink from being looked at. I had spent 6 years making myself small enough to keep everyone comfortable. I was about to find out what happened when I stopped. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that. I set the folder on the hood of the Mercedes, next to the bow, and I opened it, and I spoke to Chloe and Sarah in a tone you'd use to give directions to a stranger. This car is owned by Halverson Medical, I said. It's a fleet vehicle. It has a GPS unit and a company title, and I signed a document making me personally responsible for it. It was never a gift. It was never mine to give, and it was never yours to vote on. The friends around the car went quiet. Somebody set down a plastic cup. Sarah looked at the papers on the hood and then at her mother, waiting for Chloe to fix it, the way Chloe fixed everything. And Chloe did what people do when the truth arrives and it costs too much to accept. She refused it. Don't do that, she said, and her voice had an edge now, thin and bright. Don't stand here and invent paperwork to keep the car for yourself. This family voted, Thea. We sat down together and we voted. Fair and square. She lifted her chin and delivered the creed like it was a trump card, warm and hard, the sentence that had ended every argument in that family for 30 years. In this family, what one has, the family has. A few of the neighbors nodded, because it sounds so good when she says it. I looked at the folder on the hood, the plain black and white truth sitting in a driveway full of people who preferred the story, and I understood that I was not fighting a lie. I was fighting a wall, built one holiday at a time, 30 years thick. Sarah snatched the folder off the hood and threw it. The papers came loose and scattered across the driveway, my signature and the VIN and the word misappropriated sliding under the tires of a car she thought was hers. Fake, she said. You printed these tonight. You'd do anything not to share. The neighbors shifted, uncomfortable now, sensing they'd wandered into something that wasn't a party. I looked at Marcus, standing by the porch, and I gave him one last chance without saying a word. Just looked at him. The man whose company had nothing to do with this, whose only job was to say she's telling the truth. I've seen the documents. He looked at the scattered papers. He looked at his mother. And he said nothing. Again, his silence as reliable as sunrise. That was the moment something clicked over in me, quietly and permanently. I had been operating on the belief that if I just presented the evidence clearly enough, calmly enough, they would have to see it. But they didn't have a truth problem. They had chosen the story that let them keep the car and feel good about it, and no document was going to talk them out of a decision that felt like generosity from the inside. Evidence only works on people who want the truth. I bent down and I picked my papers up off the driveway, one by one, in front of everyone, and I put them back in the folder, and I did not hurry. Then I stood up and I understood, with a strange calm, that I had been trying to win an argument, when what I actually needed to do was something else entirely. I drove home and Marcus came after me, and this time I made him sit down at our own kitchen table, in our own house, where his mother's certainty couldn't fill the room. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. 6 years. What have you actually told them about me? And maybe because we were finally alone, or maybe because he was tired, he told me. He'd told his mother my job was smaller than it was, so she wouldn't feel outdone. He'd let her believe my salary was modest, so she wouldn't ask why we didn't help more. When I paid for things, he let them think it was family money, his money, so no one had to feel indebted to me specifically. He had spent our entire marriage editing me down into a version his family could be comfortable with, a version who gave, and never had anything of her own worth mentioning. "It wasn't about you," he said, which is what people say right before they tell you it was entirely about you. It just kept the peace. You know how they are. Then he reached for the sentence, the old reliable one, the soft little plea that had closed every door before I could walk through it. "Just keep the peace, Thea." He said it softer this time, almost tender, like it still worked. And I finally heard what it actually meant. It had never meant keep the peace. It had meant keep yourself small, keep yourself quiet, keep being the wife who absorbs everything so I never have to stand up to my own mother. My silence hadn't been a gift I gave this family. It had been the raw material they'd built the whole lie out of. I sat at that table long after Marcus went to bed, and I did the hardest thinking of my life. For 6 years I had believed I was the strong one, the mature one, the person big enough to let things go. I had worn my silence like a virtue, and sitting there in the dark, I finally saw the shape of it from the outside. My silence hadn't made me the bigger person. It had made me the easiest person in the family to overrule. The safe one. The one whose no never came, so nobody ever had to plan around it. Every time I swallowed something to keep the peace, I hadn't been rising above the conflict. I had been teaching them, patiently, year after year, that my boundaries were suggestions. Chloe hadn't taken the car because she was cruel. She'd taken it because 6 years of my nodding had taught her that whatever I had, the family could have, and I had never once given her a reason to believe otherwise. I had helped build the wall I was now standing on the wrong side of. That was the thing I had never let myself see, because seeing it meant admitting that my great strength, my calm, my endless understanding, had been a kind of cowardice wearing a nicer outfit. The peace I'd kept had only ever been the peace of a person who never says no. I went to bed at 3 in the morning, and I woke at 6 knowing exactly what I had to do, and knowing, for the first time, that the calm I'd hidden behind for 6 years was about to become the calm I finally used. At 7 o'clock Monday morning, I called Dana Okafor and I said the words I'd spent all weekend trying to avoid. "Open the recovery order." My voice didn't shake. Dana didn't gloat and she didn't console. She just said, "Understood. I'll dispatch our contracted recovery to the vehicle's current GPS location. You'll want to file a report with the local non-emergency line so there's a case number on record for the unauthorized possession. That protects you." So I hung up and I called the police non-emergency line, and I reported it exactly as it was, without drama, a company vehicle in someone's possession without authorization, and I gave them the VIN and the address and the fleet department's contact, and they gave me a case number. That was the whole weapon. Not a lawyer, not a screaming match, not some scheme to outmaneuver Chloe at her own game. Chloe's power had always been the family vote, the ritual of everyone agreeing so that taking felt like consensus. I couldn't beat her at that, and I didn't try. I wasn't going to gather a bigger faction or manipulate the room. I did the one thing that ritual couldn't touch. I told the plain truth to people whose entire job was to deal in plain facts, and I let a process that has no feelings and takes no votes do the thing my family refused to do, which was to call the car exactly what it was. I dialed the number with my hand steady for the first time in 6 years. If you're waiting for the moment she stops apologizing for existing, it's coming. Comment the word boundary if you've been her, and hit subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. Then I got in my rental and I drove the 20 minutes to Chloe's house, because I was not going to hide in my kitchen while it happened. If a truck was coming to take a car out of my mother-in-law's driveway with my case number attached to it, I was going to stand there and own every part of it. That was new for me. The old Thea would have let it happen from a distance, would have found a way to not be present for the discomfort, to keep her hands clean of the scene. Not anymore. My phone started going off before I was halfway there. Marcus, one text after another. Don't do this. Please don't do this. Mom will never forgive you. Call it off. There's still time. Then, Thea, if you do this, I don't know what happens to us. I read them at a red light. All of them. And I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and I kept driving. For 6 years his discomfort had been the emergency that overrode everything, the alarm that made me abandon my own position and run to smooth things over. I felt the pull of it even now, the deep trained instinct to turn the car around and make his panic stop. And I kept driving anyway, past the exit I could have taken, toward the one thing I had never once chosen over his comfort in 6 years of marriage, which was myself. The safety net was gone. My job was on the line, my marriage was on the line, and I had run out of nets to fall into. There was nothing left underneath me but the truth and my own 2 feet. And it turned out that was enough to stand on. I pulled up to Chloe's house and they were already outside, Chloe and Sarah, standing in the driveway near the Mercedes like they were guarding it. When they saw my rental, something eased in their faces. They thought I'd come to apologize. They thought the quiet one had lost her nerve overnight and driven over to smooth it all back down, the way I always did, the way 6 years had taught them I would. Chloe even started toward me with her arms half open. There she is, she said. I knew you'd come to your senses. Sit down, have some coffee. We'll put this whole silly thing behind us. I stood in the driveway in the Monday morning light and I did not sit down. I'm not here to apologize, I said in the calmest voice I owned. A recovery truck is on its way here right now. The company is repossessing its vehicle. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from a stranger with a tow chain. For a second, nobody moved. Sarah's mouth opened. Chloe's face went through several expressions trying to find one that fit. And then, from somewhere down the quiet suburban street, faint but unmistakable in the morning stillness, came the low diesel growl of a heavy truck downshifting as it turned onto the block. Every head in that driveway turned toward the sound. I did not turn around. I already knew what was coming, because I was the one who had called it, and for the first time in 6 years, I was not afraid of the thing that was about to happen. Chloe recovered fast. She always did. Call it off, she said, stepping toward me. Whatever you started, you can stop it. Call your company and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them the family worked it out. She still thought this was a thing that could be smoothed over, that if I made one phone call in the right tone, the family fiction could swallow the facts one more time. So I did make a phone call, but not the one she wanted. I took my phone out, and I called Dana Okafor back to confirm the recovery, and then I did the thing the old Thea would never have done. I set the phone down on Chloe's little folding table, next to the lemonade pitcher, and I put it on speaker, so that everyone standing in that driveway would hear it with their own ears, instead of through my summary. Dana's voice came out clear and flat into the morning air. Confirming recovery on the Halverson Fleet vehicle. Unauthorized possession has been logged with a police case number. Our operator is en route to the registered owner's address to repossess. Is the vehicle accessible? I looked at Chloe and I answered. It's accessible. It's in the driveway. There was a silence in that yard you could have leaned on. Chloe's face, for the first time in the entire 6 years I had known her, went pale and lost its certainty, because a stranger's voice on a speakerphone had just said out loud in her own driveway, the thing she had spent all weekend insisting wasn't true. The word unauthorized hung in the air where her creed usually lived. This was the moment the old life ended. The one where I stayed quiet and let her tell the story her way. I had said the truth out loud, in front of everyone, and there was no one saying it now. The recovery truck rounded the corner and rolled up in front of the house, a big flatbed with the company's contracted operator on the door, amber lights turning slow and steady in the morning sun. Neighbors came out onto their porches to see what the noise was. A man watering his lawn 2 houses down stood with the hose running into the grass, forgotten. Sarah made a sound I'd never heard her make and rushed to the Mercedes. And for a wild second I thought she might throw herself across the hood. Instead, she grabbed the bow off the windshield, the ridiculous celebration bow, and yanked it loose and clutched it to her chest, as if removing the decoration could change whose name was on the title. It was almost unbearable to watch, the way she held that bow, still not understanding that the car had never been a thing a bow could make hers. Ivy had come out onto the front step and stood there in her school clothes with her backpack already on, watching the flatbed with wide eyes. "Mommy," she said in the clear, carrying voice children have, "are they taking the car back?" Nobody answered her. Sarah couldn't. Chloe wouldn't. And I decided the child deserved a true answer more than the adults deserved a comfortable silence. So I said, gently, "Yes, sweetheart. It has to go back to the people who really own it." Ivy nodded slowly, absorbing this, filing away a fact about how the world actually works, and I thought, at least one person in this family is going to grow up knowing the difference between a gift and a thing you just took. The operator climbed down with a clipboard and did his job with the bored professionalism of a man who repossesses things for a living. He confirmed the VIN against his order. He showed Chloe the ownership documentation and the police case number when she demanded to see it. And he was unfailingly polite and completely immovable, because the paperwork was real, and there was nothing in that driveway anyone could say to make it not real. Chloe read the documents. I watched her read them. I watched the exact second she understood that the papers I'd set on the hood the night before, the ones Sarah had thrown across the driveway, had been true the whole time. And instead of turning to me, she turned to her son. "Marcus," she said, and her voice cracked on his name. "Say something. Do something. Are you going to let them take it?" And for the first time all weekend, every face in that driveway turned to look at Marcus, the neighbors and Sarah and Chloe and the tow operator, all of them waiting to see what the man of the family would do. He stood by the porch with his hands in his pockets, the same pose he'd held on Thursday when I first drove up, and he opened his mouth, and nothing came out. His silence, which had been invisible for 6 years because it always hid behind my noise, was suddenly the loudest thing in the driveway, and everyone could see it now. I didn't feel triumphant watching it. I felt something quieter and sadder. I felt like I was finally seeing my husband clearly, in daylight, in front of everyone, and there was so much less of him there than I had spent 6 years pretending. Marcus finally moved, but not to help. He crossed the driveway and took my elbow and steered me up onto the porch, away from the others, lowering his voice to the private register he used when he needed something from me. "Thea, please," he said. "Look at me. You can still stop this. Tell the guy to give us a week. Sign whatever puts it on hold. Just don't let them drag it out of here in front of the whole street, in front of my mother, in front of everyone." His eyes were wet and his hand was warm on my arm, and every trained instinct in my body wanted to fix his distress, because fixing his distress was the oldest reflex I had. "If you let this happen right now in front of all of them," he said, "I don't know if we survive it. I don't. My mother will never forgive you, and I can't. Thea, I can't stand here and choose between my wife and my mother." There it was, finally said out loud, the choice he'd been forcing on me silently for 6 years, except he'd gotten it exactly backward. He thought he was the one being asked to choose. He didn't understand that he'd made his choice 100 times already, at 100 dinners, every time he'd stayed quiet and let me be the one who paid. Now he was asking me to bail him out of the consequences one more time, to sign a paper that kept the peace and kept the lie, and kept me small for one more week, which we both knew would become one more year. And I stood on that porch with his hand on my arm, and I understood that this was the whole thing, the entire 6 years, compressed into a single choice I finally got to make out loud. I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at the man I had spent 6 years trying to please, whose comfort I had put ahead of my job, my truth, and my own name, over and over, until there was almost nothing left of me that hadn't been edited down to fit his family. A week wouldn't fix it. A week was just 6 more years wearing a disguise. If I signed that hold, I would keep my marriage exactly the way it had always been, which was to say, I would keep disappearing, one polite concession at a time, until there was no Thea left at all. And I found that I did not want to keep it anymore. Not like that. Not at that price. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned away from my husband and I looked across the driveway at the tow operator, who was standing by his rig waiting for a signal, and I nodded at the driver instead. Just a nod. Go ahead. Take it. The operator nodded back and reached for his controls, and I heard the winch begin to turn. Behind me, I heard Marcus say my name like something tearing. Chloe found her voice, and it came out shrill and disbelieving. You'd humiliate this family over a car? I turned back and looked at her, and I answered her in the calmest voice I have ever used, the calm I'd been saving my whole life for a moment I didn't know was coming. It was never mine to give, I said. It was never yours to vote on. And as I said it, I watched the winch draw the Mercedes up onto the flatbed, and I felt 2 things at exactly the same time, so tangled together I couldn't pull them apart. I felt myself win, and I felt my marriage end. Both. In the same breath, in the same driveway, at the same time. The chain snugged tight and the Mercedes settled onto the flatbed, $70,000 of somebody else's property going back to the people it belonged to. I stood in the driveway with my hands perfectly still at my sides, and I did not cry, and I did not gloat. I just watched. Sarah was sobbing into her mother's shoulder, still holding that crumpled bow, and Chloe, watching the car she'd voted to give away roll up onto a stranger's truck, said something I have never been able to forget. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the car, and her voice came out small and old and stripped of all its certainty. No one ever asked me what I wanted, she said. My whole life. My mother-in-law took what she wanted, and I took what I could, and no one ever once asked me. And for just a second I understood her completely. She wasn't a villain who woke up cruel. She was a woman who'd been robbed young by the same machine she was now running, who'd survived the only way she'd been shown, by becoming the one who did the taking. I understood it. It didn't change a single thing I was going to do, but I understood it. The operator finished his straps and climbed into his cab. As the flatbed pulled away with the Mercedes riding high and bright in the morning sun, I looked at Chloe, and I gave her back her own creed, changed. All those years she'd said what one has, the family has. I said it quietly, just for the 2 of us. What one has, I told her, she gets to keep. And then the truck turned the corner, and the car was gone. The taillights of the flatbed disappeared around the corner, and I stood there in the sudden quiet and called Dana Okafor to confirm the vehicle was in transit to the lot. She checked the GPS and told me it would be verified well before the 9 o'clock audit. My job was safe. The career I'd built one hospital account at a time, the thing that was actually mine, was going to survive the weekend intact. Marcus did not walk me to my rental. He stood on his mother's porch with his mother, and I understood, watching him choose that spot to stand, that my marriage had climbed onto the flatbed and driven off with the car. We separated within the month, and the divorce was final by the following spring. Chloe never apologized, not once. To this day she believes I humiliated the family over a car, that a truly good wife would have kept the peace. Sarah blocked me on everything. The machine that ran that family kept right on running, because I never had the power to shut it down, and I'd stopped pretending I did. But I had broken one link in it. My link. I was no longer the channel that quietly moved my own life into their hands whenever they decided they needed it more. They could keep their vote. They just couldn't cast it over me anymore. And it turned out that was the only vote I'd ever actually needed to win. The one where I finally stopped seconding every motion to give myself away. A few months later, I bought myself a car. Nothing flashy. A sensible sedan a couple of years old. The kind of reasonable used car I'd once tried to buy for Sarah. But the title came in the mail with my name on it. Only my name, and I sat in the driveway of my own smaller, quieter house and held it for a while. In October, Marcus texted. "The family wants you to come to Thanksgiving," he wrote. "Everyone's willing to let it go. Come back, we'll put it behind us." I read it twice. There was no apology in it anywhere, just an invitation to pretend it never happened. I texted back that I'd come the day someone offered a real apology, and then I set the phone down and I did not wait for the 3 dots. The last time I saw Ivy, she asked me why I didn't have the pretty car anymore. I knelt down to her level, and I told her the truest thing I know. "You don't have to give something away," I said, "just because somebody tells you the whole family agreed." She thought about it, the way she thinks about everything, and she nodded. I used to think staying quiet made me the bigger person, but all it ever did was make me easier to overrule, and the day I stopped voting against myself was the day I finally got to keep her. That's how a company car taught a whole family what a boundary sounds like. The empty driveway? The vote that stole nothing of mine. The nod I gave the driver while my husband begged me to stay small. If you've ever swallowed the truth to keep the peace, tell me in the comments what it cost you and subscribe, because next week another quiet woman decides the quiet isn't worth it anymore.